Everybody, it's Heather and welcome to Mystic Musings. Today is Freaky Friday and our countdown today, 5 of the creepiest graves. Let's get started. County Road 400 in Amity, Indiana appears to be just like any other road, small town, no big deal, until you get to the huge mound right in the center. What's underneath this mound? Why, a body, of course. Normally, if a road is being constructed and there is a grave in the center of it, the workers will flatten out the mound, pave right over it. But in this instance, the road splits so that here's this part of the road, here's this part of the road, and then here's this body right here. And this was all done to accommodate the remains of Nancy Curlin Barnett. Who is this gal? Well, let me tell you about her. At just 14, she got married William Barnett, and the two went on to have 11 children. Fun. She passed in 1831, and William wanted to grant her dying wish. Her dying wish was to be buried on her favorite part of their property. Now, at the time, all this was land. It was just beautiful land, overlooked a creek, and so, you know, who wouldn't want to be buried there with such a view? So that's what he did. He paid his respects by putting his wife where she wanted to be. Good husband. For a while, it was just her. But, I mean, this was a prime piece of real estate. So before long, it was a full-blown cemetery. Graves all over the place. The more the merrier. Decades later, a National Guard training camp was about to be built. Problem was, this graveyard was sort of like right in the middle of where they needed to put a road. So, all the other graves were moved, no big deal, that happens, pretty common. But Nancy's grave, that wasn't okay. Now, I would love for this story to get crazy and be like, you know, Nancy came out of the grave and said, "Ye shall not pass," but that didn't happen. What did happen is that one of her kids came out with a shotgun and threatened the pants off these people and was like, "If you think for a second that I'm gonna let you move my mama, you're mistaken." So at first, you know, they threatened him back. You know, they figured that he was bluffing. But no, it went on to the point that they were actually so afraid of him that they finally were like, "I don't care, whatever. We will leave her where she lay." So the road was built, and Nancy's burial mound was granted a historic marker. Most likely this was because people were probably asking, why the heck is there this random mound in the road all the time? And people probably got really sick of that, and so instead of them having to be like, well, you see, what had happened was this guy came out with a gun. So instead they were just like, it's historic. We couldn't move it. So this one, there's not a whole lot of paranormal stories that I could find. However, come on. With that kind of ruckus, that kind of history, you know old Nancy probably directs traffic or something at midnight every night. I don't know. I feel like she should. You know, tonight's a full moon. Maybe she'll just be standing up there like, yeah, watch out for my grave. It's right here. You're driving past it. You're welcome. I don't know. That's what I would do. Moving on. So, during the Hatfield and McCoy days in old Pikeville, Kentucky, there was another prominent family that you may be a little less familiar with, the Hatchers. I will skip the backstory of why they were prominent and who begot who and all that, but just remember that they were like a big deal. Anyway, in 1889, James Hatcher married Octavia Smith. They were only married a short time before they had a baby. Unfortunately, that baby died not long after he was born, and Octavia herself died very shortly after she gave birth. Her funeral was scheduled immediately because she was not embalmed. It was very, very hot, and so between the heat and her still having all of her gooey guts and stuff, they needed to get on that. So she had died of some sort of coma-like illness. She didn't die in childbirth. It was coincidental that she passed shortly after she gave birth. But at the funeral, after the funeral, a lot of people began showing similar symptoms. So there was a lot of fainting, and people would be in these, long sleeps, basically. And obviously, people were like, oh my God, wouldn't it be terrible if old Octavia was, So James hightailed it to the cemetery. As you can imagine, they dug up her grave, and of course, their greatest nightmare had come true. They had totally buried her alive. But I can't help but think that I would be like, that husband, he put me in the ground. Like, I don't know. I think I'd be a little bit pissed off. Anyway, so the coffin had not been sealed all that well. So to make this even more horrible, she had actually survived for like a while after they had buried her. So you have to think, already just the worst ever to wake up and be in your final resting place. Then, like, you're still not dying. Like, you're breathing just enough. It's like torturous, and you're clawing at everything, and no one can hear you, and not great. And I can't help but think, like, if they had tried to embalm her, would she have woken up? Or would they have just, like, taken all her insides out and never known that she was still alive? Is that possible? I'm not a doctor. So, needless to say, there were scratch marks everywhere. The lining was torn. Her fingernails were bloody. I mean, she fought. And I'm not trying to make fun of this in any way. I mean, that's the worst ever. But I mean, you have to admit, like, it's so surreal to think now that, you could just wake up and your beloved just put you in the ground. You weren't dead, but I mean, technicalities. Marriage. To make this an even more disturbing visual, apparently her face was contorted in a state of sheer horror. Well, duh. I mean, did they think that they were going to open it and she was going to be like, no. Now officially dead. She was reburied. And she totally haunts the cemetery. Woo, hauntings. So, sometimes you can hear her weeping. Yeah, I'd be crying too. Like that. And you can also see her wandering the graveyard. So, if you're in Pikeville, Kentucky, check it out. Next, Sarah Ann is resting peacefully in Pennsylvania in a cage. Yes, for real, a cage. Boring people are going to tell you that this cage is there to protect from grave robbers, weeds, general disarray. When was the last time that you went to a cemetery, though, and saw no weeds or anything? I mean, like, people don't really care that much about that stuff. It's really sad. But I am not a boring person, and I'm going to tell you the truth, kids. She's got a cage around her coffin because she was a vampire. Yep, you heard it here. So, the legend is that her parents thought that she died from a vampire bite. Clearly. You all know what happens. You get bitten by a vampire, boom, you're a vampire. What does that mean? You're gonna pop up out of your grave and be all like, people, it's not gonna be appreciated. How do you solve this potential problem? Boom, cage. Now, I mean, it's really pretty, it's a wrought iron cage, but it's a cage. I don't care what you want to call it. I don't care if you tell me, well, Heather, they're actually quite common. No, that is a cage. Accept it. Supposedly, to make this even more interesting, there is a tree directly behind her grave. On one side of the tree, the farthest away from her, it is green, it is growing, it is beautiful, it is life. On the other side, dead everywhere. So, fun. And apparently, a lesser known fact is that one of her relatives, maybe, I don't think that the grave is actually marked. There's someone next to her who's also in a cage. I guess that vampire was busy. Anyway, man, 1800s. Good times. Marjorie McCall. She was married to a doctor. How nice. They were living happily in Ireland. Unfortunately, it was the 1700s. There were lots of diseases. What does this mean for Marjorie? She died. So, she succumbed to a fever and was promptly buried to avoid spreading the disease. This is sounding familiar. Unfortunately, even more common than disease, grave robbing. Because of the sickness that she died of, her body was very swollen. There was a lot of swelling happening, so her fingers were bigger than usual, which meant that her husband could not get her gold wedding band off of her hand. What does this mean? It means that now she is an even more attractive target to grave robbers, because not only will they get a cadaver to sell, but they'll get jewelry to sell as well. So before the soil was even settled on her grave, I'm talking night of the funeral, these grave robbers came out, dug her back up, and proceeded to try to get that ring. Now, when they had heard that it was stuck, it was not an exaggeration. They could not get it. So, not willing to lose such a golden, pun intended, opportunity, they just decided to hack her finger off. Well, that was all fine and great, except that Marjorie wasn't dead. Wow. What does this mean? Well, it means that she was screaming bloody murder, because now she's totally revived. Blood is squirting everywhere. She's clearly very scared, confused, angry, pained. So she totally bypasses the thieves and hightails it home. Her house was very close to the cemetery, so she's kind of like limping over that way. She gets there and she knocks on the door. Now, the story goes that her husband and children were just about to sit down to dinner, so he hears this knock and he says, "Gosh, kids, if your mother wasn't dead, I would swear that was her knock." Well, imagine his surprise when he opens the door and sees his wife. Or don't, because he died. Yes, that's right, he had a heart attack. Sheer terror, dropped dead right there. Really dead, by the way. That lightning doesn't strike twice. What does happen twice is the use of that grave. That was not grammatically correct. Anyway, they buried him in the grave that his wife had just evacuated. I don't like that at all. Thrifty. So she went on to remarry, had some more kids, and is apparently buried somewhere near her original resting place, and her tombstone reads, "Lived once, buried twice." Because she had a sense of humor, I guess. That's good. Her ghost is sometimes seen looking for those who wronged her, aka the people who chopped her finger off. Don't you wonder what happened to them? Like, supposedly they also dropped dead, but I feel like that's just too much dead dropping. I think that probably they wet themselves and ran home, and then never ever lived a life of crime again, but rather turned to the priesthood. No? Okay. Anyway, this is my favorite for a couple reasons. One, Charleston is a second home to me. I feel like I was raised there because I was there so often growing up. My parents used to live there, blah, blah, blah. And two, I love Edgar Allan Poe. I'm sorry if I'm a cliche because I like creepy things and Poe's one of my favorites, but it's just true. My favorite poem is Annabel Lee, and I actually didn't know this story, so join me on this fantastic voyage of creepy and sad. So Annabel Lee, yes, the Annabel Lee of the poem Annabel Lee, was a real person, and her grave has a story. Anna Ravenel was 14 in 1827. Not exactly too young for marriage at the time, but like still kind of. Anyway, her parents were like a big deal. Like if you're familiar with Charleston, Ravenel, tomato, is a, like you see that name everywhere. It's popular still. They're like a big deal. So because she was a big deal and her family was a big deal, she was already promised to an aristocratic young man, and so they were going to be wed, I guess, whenever her dad decided she was of age. So like maybe 14 and a half. Anyway, but Anna, like any young girl, she wanted romance. She didn't want to be, here's my dowry, take me. She wanted a story, and ooh, did she get one. She fell in love with a soldier stationed at Fort Moultrie, just across the Charleston Harbor. Edgar Perry was his name, and he was just 18 when he met Anna. When her father realized what was happening, he was furious, and therefore determined to keep the lovers apart. So they did what any young, determined couple would do and figured out ways around that. So their rendezvous point was in a cemetery. Yes. If you're familiar with the poem Annabel Lee, then your head's already going. We'll get there. In 1828, Edgar was transferred. Many believe it was because Anna's father pulled some strings. I'm going to jump on that theory train as well. So with Edgar gone, Anna's father relaxed. Unfortunately, shortly after he had been transferred, Anna fell very ill. She had some fever. There are different ideas, theories as to what she had, but I mean, she was very sick. Pick your disease. I mean, they were all rampant. Anna's sister tried to get word to Edgar. She did succeed, but unfortunately, it was too late. He did not make it back before she died. He tried to come to the funeral, and this breaks my heart. He couldn't. Anna's father, even though she was dead, was still just completely determined to keep them separated, and so he wouldn't let Edgar in. Not only would he not allow him into the funeral, this man was so insane that he didn't even want Edgar to know where his daughter was buried. So he purchased 6 plots at the Unitarian Church, the very cemetery where the couple would meet for their secret dates, actually. And he buried Anna in one unmarked grave. The remaining 5 were dug 3 feet deep, and those plots were unmarked as well to ensure that Edgar wouldn't find Annabel. Now, I mean, I don't know that he didn't, but I feel like if I had been him, I would have been out there with a shovel, so I at least knew where she was. I wouldn't have dug her up and done anything. I would have wanted to know where she was so that I could visit her. It makes me really sad, guys. And as I'm sure you guys figured out, Edgar Perry was in fact a pen name for Edgar Allan Poe, and his final poem, Annabel Lee, is no doubt about the love of his life that he unfortunately never got to hold on to. It's reported that Annabel still makes an appearance from time to time searching for her beloved, which is both beautiful and so sad to me. I've put the poem in the description box because if you haven't read this, even if you don't like poetry, I don't really care. It's so special, and knowing the story behind it, I think, makes it kind of a big deal. Anyway, so that's it. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Hope that you can hear me okay. I'm gonna redo that other video, you guys. Sorry. Anyway, I will see you back on Sunday, and I hope that you have a fantastic start to your weekends. Thanks, guys. Bye!